I want to talk about pitching in line with our podcast. By the way, we're back, 2023. Happy New Year. I had a thought the other day, as you usually do. I think I was either out walking or something, about pitching and my preconceptions before I actually got in a room and pitched for the first time. And it was wildly off kilter for what is reality. And I started to think, I wonder why. And I'll dig into this a little bit more. But I think TV and film is to blame. So what I mean by that is, the first time I was in a pitching scenario, or should I say before I was going into a pitching scenario for the first time in my career, I had quite what seems like trivial preconceptions, one of which is standing up in front of whoever you're presenting to, who are sat down as an audience. And I started to think about it just last week, whenever it was, that we've done, in particular the last 6 months, so many pitches at Flaunt. And obviously virtual ones are virtual, they go how they go. But meeting room, boardroom at Flaunt, get some people in, clients that you want to pitch to. Never once have I considered standing up. But yet, before I'd even got into that situation for the first time in my career, and I was playing it out as I like to do sometimes in my mind, I envisaged standing up and pitching, because no one sort of tells you necessarily. You don't have a handbook of this is how to pitch. I'm sure there are books out there. And it just made me think, I think that was totally because of how the likes of The Apprentice, for example, sorry to bring it up, Emily in Paris, for example, is portraying pitching. Have you got any experiences and thoughts when you might have watched any of those programs as to how that does or doesn't translate into real business world and working life?
It's interesting that you say about standing, because I think out of all the pitches that I've been in, everyone's been sat. But
Ever?
yeah.
Ever. So how long have you been pitching for?
15 years.
And have you ever stood?
So
Here we go.
this is where it gets interesting, because once I'd got like a dozen pitches under my belt, I then began to use standing as a way of leaving an impression.
Right.
Because it was such a rarity for someone to stand, if I got excited about what I was presenting, I stood and I went up to the TV or the projector or the screen or wherever it was to emphasise my point. And I've had feedback on more than one occasion that resonated.
Really?
As a thing. Because I think it is because I think people build pitching up as like, it's almost like New Year's. It's like, fuck, this is going to be the best night ever, and then it's shit.
Yeah.
You go into a pitch with a massive misconception of thinking that it's this grand thing, when the people that you're pitching to are people, first of all. So it turns out being a lot more casual than you anticipate it being. Which I think is probably, I don't know where it would come from.
What, you mean the blame? Oh, blame might be a strong word, but I absolutely am in the belief that I've got that picture of pitching before I went into that first pitch, and I didn't stand. And I've never stood, I don't think. What I have done in previous walks of life is stood. You know, if you're interviewing for somewhere and they've asked you to do a task beforehand and it's a presentation to reflect back that, you know, the output of that task, I've stood up to deliver that. No one told the people that I presented to.
Didn't ask you to stand.
Didn't ask me to stand. I chose to. Why did I choose to? So it was me and two people in an interview. It's just all a little bit confusing in my mind, and then I just think, right, so the first experience of me pitching, in person in my career what has influenced my sort of thoughts and beliefs going into that? Well, yeah, it might be stuff I read and whatnot, but actually something like The Apprentice, it were on last night. I don't watch it anymore, by the way, but I used to watch that. And Dragon's Den I'm a little bit more understanding of. I believe it's a slightly different pitch scenario than, you know, what we can almost compare it to and see in The Apprentice. I mean, agencies now focus on are focused on The Apprentice. They sometimes the tasks go to sit with a branding agency in London, for example. So there is something to compare to. But you look at, firstly, how people are acting in these pitches. It's absolutely nothing like real life. They stand up in front of the audience. We don't really do that. It's interesting that you've done it from a tactical.
It was almost a strategy of mine to stand at the right point to leave an impression about the part that I was trying to emphasise.
Do you think, with how competitive pitching is typically for us, and we have the conversation all the time, don't we, that it can come down to such small margins, incremental stuff, you know, learning on the job from the last one and then tweaking things, and genuinely feedback can be, it was so tight, such a tight decision. Do you think something like that?
100%.
Quite literally a physical
100%.
presence in the room. I don't know if that's
why I'm so glad that we're back to being in the room.
Yeah. I mean,
context and the unspoken stuff in a pitch is really important.
Yeah,
really important. And I think The Apprentice, Dragon's Den, they have a format because it would make really boring TV if everybody was sat in a boardroom doing a presentation. That's
the thing. It's over dramatised, isn't it? I wonder if they get briefed on it, behind the scenes. Some of these candidates that are on the likes of The Apprentice to go and fuck shit up and make it entertaining. I get that, but it's dangerous is probably the wrong word, but it's a little bit misleading for people, you know, young, naive people who don't have that experience yet. That's your sort of
the best. I tell you what, just sorry to butt in there, but the best. This just came into my head. The best pitch I've ever been in. Both myself and the person we were pitching to stood up.
I was wondering whether you're going to say that. That'd be like
they would
fight.
I was so passionate about what I was showing on screen that I was up and I was like dissecting. I think it was a graph, and then the person that we were pitching to stood up, and it was almost like we got into a debate in the middle of it.
That's energy.
It was so good.
It's like positive energy, that, isn't it?
And that's where I think, yeah.
And also, that's like matching. There's a big psychology thing.
100%.
In sales, well, anything, but in sales in particular, that focuses you on, obviously, body language and whatnot, but matching your audience. I mean, if your audience matches you, that's a big shift.
Well, if you think about let's say, like, you're pitching against an agency that's also incredible. The pitch material is incredible. What they're saying as part of that content is incredible. One is so passionate about it that they stand, and one is also passionate about it but they don't stand. That micro difference could be the difference. And then if you hit on a prospect that shares the passion and they stand, fuck.
Yeah.
It's chemistry, isn't it?
We're going to have to stand after this episode goes out. People are going to be like, hang on, you don't have the passion or the energy. But obviously it's not as simple as that.
Well, it's circumstantial, isn't it? But I think it does come down to chemistry. Especially like our agency, it's people business, isn't it? As much as we're experts at what we do, you're paying for the expertise. Yet, if you don't click with the teams and the people that are delivering the work, it makes it a whole lot harder.
Yeah. I said, go back to my point a little bit ago, dangerous is probably the wrong word, but I get it's for viewership, is that a word? Viewing figures, as to why they're...
It's dramatised, isn't it?
Yeah. And you think, okay, so how do they sort that out? Do they put something a little bit more realistic on TV? I don't know now whether that would actually do well. I think a few years ago you'd say, who wants to look at a quite real life example of how a standard pitch meeting goes, i.e. everyone sat around a board. It is, to me, it's just a meeting really, isn't it? It's another meeting. It has a different aim and purpose and comes therefore with sort of different territory, but really...
It depends what kind of pitch though, like agency pitch is quite specific because there's a people element to it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a founder pitching for funding, for example, and you're in a room of VCs and you're pitching your product, it's probably going to be a different dynamic.
Yeah.
The people element isn't there because the emphasis is on the product.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's a drier room.
I'm actually thinking now, back to education as well. Did we all sort of stand up every time we had to do a presentation? I feel like you did, didn't you? Like in front of your class.
This is where it gets into like public speaking though, and I think public speaking should be taught in school.
And you'd always do that stud, wouldn't you? Pretty sure. If it's like...
Yeah, probably at scale, like if you're on a stage, for example.
Yeah.
But I think public speaking is a really underrated skill that I think if it was taught in high school, for example, would stand so many people in good stead. And obviously there are going to be people that are naturally more comfortable in those situations.
Yeah.
But taking away the fear because you have a little bit of education about it and how to compose yourself and how to go into that situation, job interviews, even really trivial things that make you nervous for absolutely no reason, like a mortgage application.
Yeah.
When you sat in front of someone and you're doing your first mortgage application with a bank or whatever, and there's so much personal interest in that process because you want to get the mortgage to get the house, you've got a weird nervousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's an unknown, it's a big deal. And I think that same psychology kind of applies to pitch process, where, bringing it back to what I was saying, if public speaking was at least touched upon in high school, it would stand a lot of people in really good stead.
Do you think they think that they're ticking that box through when you do it in class presentation about fucking the history of World War I or whatever? Like, is that where they think they're...
But there's a difference, isn't there, between presentations and public speaking?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think public speaking has its nuance that is different to pitching as well. There's crossover, absolutely, and I think that'd set you up, baseline would set you up for sort of both if it was taught more.
But you're definitely right, though, by thinking, let's put these kids in front of the class to do a presentation. They probably think that falls into public speaking. That's
what I mean, yeah. There's blurs, crossovers, rightly so, but actually I think there's a distinction. There's clear distinctions between public speaking and sort of presenting, pitching as well, in my mind. But as I say, it just occurred to me with probably the run of pitches that we've done in the last 6-12 months in particular has been mental, good mental. But just reflecting on that and thought, hang on, the very first time I didn't have experience of it, but I was faced with the pitch, I was fully expecting that, everyone, the agency all stands up. Like when your teacher walks into class, everyone stands up. I expected it to be like that. Be interested to have an experience like you had, though, where you stand up and the audience stands up with you.
I've never really spoken about that as a thing that I've done in pitches. And I might ask people who I've been in the room with previously if they noticed whether I'd stood.
Yeah.
Because I don't do it all the time, and I don't do it if it's not appropriate, obviously, but I definitely used to do that in big situations as a way of trying to leave an impression. And I think I learned from people like, I've been in the room with Heather Healy quite a few times, tremendous at pitching, stood quite a bit, where appropriate.
That's what I was we might have to go on to a different episode here. I can imagine standing up, I'm going to say midway through, that almost has a, whoa, what's happening? That's like emphasis on that point of the energy that we talked about. If you stand from the beginning, I think that's making an impression above sitting from the beginning, sitting all the way through it. But I think sitting and then standing at some point, whatever point it is, around the slide or the information that you're sharing at that point, I think that, to me, in theory, I've not seen it happen before, probably have seen it happen before, but not in pitching. I think that, to me, trumps all of that. I can imagine that as having a real impact from an audience perspective.
It makes people sit up.
Yeah. And we've been doing, when Kirsty came in last year, she's all about keeping it interactive, keeping people awake, obviously, and super engaged and dropping little bits and pieces in. That must be something that I'm sure she would advocate for. Suddenly, a physical change, i.e. standing up.
Maybe we could ask her.
Oh. Anyway, just to round off on the TV side of things, Emily in Paris, I've never watched any more than the 30 seconds I was forced to watch last night, which was horrible. So it was a little pitch scene that I could reel off so many things that just made me cringe, that was just so wholly inaccurate. She cut people off mid-talking, colleagues and I think the client as well. Took a phone call halfway through, walked out, came back in, basically rubbished what her colleague's idea was, and then just said, I've got an idea for this pitch, forget what he's just said, here it is. Just come up with something on the spot, which was marvellous by all accounts. Absolute nonsense.
I mean, when you've been in pitches a long, long time, you do have those ideas. Whereby you and I have discussed the idea that I'm probably 99% sure you know what I'm going to say.
I do.
Where we get an opportunity and you don't prepare anything and you just go in.
I'm sorry, but Emily in Paris does not operate like that. Whatever her name is, Emily in Paris. Yeah, that's nonsense. I think, but yeah, it's just something I reflected on recently, and I felt like you'd know where I was coming from there. That there's a little bit of
it's an experience thing, I think.
Yeah,
like I said, it comes down to the fact that in agency world, the people are part of what you buy into.
Yeah.
So that experience in the room as a prospect, not a client, is important. I would liken it to, if you go out for a meal, for example, and you get a waiter or a waitress that one comes up to you and takes your order and then gives you your bill. That's it. One comes up to you, pre-order, asks if you want anything, if do you want a drink first, comes and takes your order, explains the dishes, explains the specials, then checks in once you've got your food to make sure you don't need anything, checks to see if you want another drink. All this kind of additional layers and you can make two really clear distinctions there on a people level with how waitress one treats you versus waiter, waitress two.
Yeah.
I think it's a very similar comparison.